a production of the New Jersey Courts.
After I became a workers' compensation judge, I was assigned to, you could be assigned virtually anywhere. My home county was Union County, but they had a system that I may have to leave Union County and go to Freehold or someplace. And then I eventually had my home county changed to cover both Freehold and Toms River. And also covered at one point Middlesex County. And Middlesex was the only county in the state that had two hearings, two courtrooms. One was in Perth Amboy, and the other one was in New Brunswick. Then I had chambers in, here in this courthouse, in the very first courtroom on the left, as you come in the front door for a while. And then that moved to down up Broad Street, around East Grand Street and to the left there. That I think is still there. I enjoyed that work because, as I used to say to kids when going to the schools to talk to kids from second grade through law school, about my first desire, one of my earlier desires was to become a doctor. And I couldn't have found a better position that utilized medicine and law more than in workers' compensation. And I really enjoyed it. And it didn't take long for the people with the supervisory authority to recognize how much I liked the combination of medicine and law. It was about 85% medicine, about 15% law. How much I enjoyed it. So they started to give me the more complex cases, major cardiovascular problem, major lung problem, pulmonary problem, major cancer problems, and you name it. One of the most famous physicians that testified before me was, while he was then the New York medical examiner, Milton Halpin. He was very famous, was on television after television was invented on a number of cases as a pathologist, and he testified before me on a number of occasions, and a number of other great doctors too. I had orthopedists and neurologists and so forth on almost a daily basis. And I enjoyed it because it was in the area of the law and medicine that I enjoyed. And I had the two combined. And when I became a county and superior court judge, that training was very helpful because we had a lot of medical malpractice cases, and we created panels to try to make a determination before a trial whether or not this case is worthy of settlement or should we try to get it dismissed. And we had a medical doctor in the field where the alleged medical malpractice injury had occurred, a lawyer from the plaintiff side and a lawyer from the defendant side, and I was one of the two judges in this county conducting those. So again, that medical background came out to be very helpful. And I tried a number of medical malpractice cases too, and wrote some opinions in that area as well.
Any particular cases stand out in your memory for either being very interesting or for their later impact?
Oh yeah, one, you mean dealing with a medical issue?
Either one, medical or legal.
Well, here's the legal.
Sure. Yep.
But the medical, one case in particular, a doctor, and I do not think this one involved workers' compensation, at least not that I recall. Doctors charged with medical malpractice after the doctor had done thoracic surgery. It may have been to remove a lung or something very serious because the chest bone had to be split. And after they had done the surgery, well, before doing the surgery, you normally count the instruments and record how many you have so you know how many to look for at the end. And they did. So when they finished the surgery, they were missing an instrument. So they roamed around in the chest cavity as long as they could without creating a major problem to the patient, and couldn't find it. They closed up everything, but put information in the chart and indicated they would go back later and look for it and find it, because they will now be able to have x-rays and everything and can find it. And that's what they did. Notwithstanding, and they took it out, but the medical malpractice lawsuit followed. And the opinion that I wrote in the appellate division used a principle of medical decision making that involving whether or not I can do the medical judgment rule, whether I can do the least amount of harm to the patient by doing A rather than B. And the A here was to close the chest, go back later and look for it, or keep looking now while the patient gets in greater and greater danger because of the anesthesia and everything, and possibly lose the patient. And so my opinion said that the use of medical judgment was proper in this case, and that there was no medical malpractice there.
But that was while you were on the appellate court?
Division, yes.
Okay. What about when you were in the workers' compensation court?
I had a number of cases, but there, they didn't have a system in place then. They have one in place now to have a publication of workers' compensation decision. Mm-hmm. I decided some very serious one, but none of them were published as a workers' compensation case. Some went to the appeals court and may have gotten published then, dealing with major medical issues, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, around the time you were making that transition from private practice and the labor department to becoming a judge on the compensation court, you were also starting your family. You'd gotten married a couple of years before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I married a beautiful young woman that had grown up here in Elizabeth on May 12th of 1962, which was a little better than 2 years after I opened my law office. And just before I became a workers' compensation judge, but I had the job in the commissioner's office. And we were married at an Episcopal church on Liberty Street here in Elizabeth, in close proximity to the courthouse. I don't recall whether or not the building is still there, but I know the Episcopal church closed as a religious institution at this location. But I saw the priest who married us. As a matter of fact, he came to my swearing-in ceremony for the Supreme Court, but he had moved out of state by then, but was moving back into the state. And my wife had grown up here in Elizabeth, and our first apartment as a couple was only 2 doors from the church, on the same side of the street as the church. Someone that used to work here at the courthouse had a vacant apartment that I had rented before we got married. And that's where we lived that was in 62. Our first child was born in 63. I'm trying to think where we're still living here then. The first child was born right down the street at St. Elizabeth Hospital, which is always in close proximity to the church and where it was living. And then we bought a house in Roselle and remained in Roselle until after the second child was born in 65. And we bought a house in Scotch Plain, the one that we're in now, in 1969, and moved in 1970. Yeah, so that's the Elizabeth connection. And of course, my wife's brothers, 3 of them attended Jeff High School down the street here. And 2 of the 3 were track stars at Jeff, and went to college on track stars too. Yeah.
Did you meet through the church?
Did I what?
Did you meet your wife through the church?
No. As a matter of fact, I met her 2 times. Once at a party in Summit that was before I opened my office, and then we never dated. I'm not even sure I even got the phone number then. And we met the second time soon after I opened my office in Elizabeth, on Elizabeth Avenue. The front part of the office was occupied by a dentist, and we were close friends. And my wife, Sophia, was a patient of his, and she had come to his office to visit. And he said to her, after he had finished working on her, how would you like to meet my friend, the new lawyer, in the back of the building? And she said yes. I don't know whether she told him she had met me already or not. So he brought her back. He brought her back and introduced her, and we started dating and got married relatively soon after that, probably a year later. Yeah.
Now, I'm just curious, having bought homes in Roselle and Scotch Plains, was there any housing discrimination in this area that you had to contend with?
Well, I did not have to, the answer to the question is yes. I did not have to deal with it directly. My next door neighbor, here's our house. On the right of the house, an African American is living there when we signed the contract in Roselle. Mm-hmm. And on my left, a white family is living there. The real estate broker told me that my white neighbor did not like the idea that he was showing the house to an African American. The white neighbor never said anything to me, but he was never very friendly. By not being friendly, I don't remember ever speaking to me. I think the wife did acknowledge me a few times, and the wife said same with her. But I know the issue existed because the dentist friend who had the front part of the office in which I had my law office tried to buy both a house and a vacant lot on which to build a house in Scotch Plains and couldn't buy either one. So I directed him to the Division of Civil Rights and to file a claim. And the real estate broker, I understand, may have been penalized because the real estate broker was going along with the game plan to avoid showing the houses to African American. And we heard that many, many times. It was that concept that led us to form a housing council that covered Plainfield and Scotch Plains. And we were instrumental in trying to encourage real estate brokers not to decline showing the houses to minority families and to press hard to try to get those sales if they could. Otherwise, there will be more complaints filed with the Division of Civil Rights. So the answer to your question is yes.
Okay. Let me pause for a second. Was there like a big feedback noise that you heard? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So you served as a workers' compensation judge from '64 till about '73, was it?
Yes.
When you became a county judge?
Right.
Again, what was that transition like, and how did that opportunity come about?
In 1972, the legislature enacted laws that created the Violent Crimes Compensation Board. That law was signed that legislation was signed into law by then Governor Cahill. And Governor Cahill's personal counsel, his personal in-house lawyer in the State House was Pierre Garvin. After that legislation was signed into law, Pierre Garvin called me at my chambers in Newark when I was a workers' compensation judge, offered me either, and I've forgotten which it was now, either a position on the Violent Crimes Compensation Board. There were going to be at least 3 people, and a chairperson would be elected or appointed. I told him, and I think I know why, because in violent crimes compensation, you're looking at people who have been physically and psychologically injured, and they were probably looking for somebody with knowledge of law and medicine as a combination to help guide some of those decisions. And while I felt that I may have enjoyed it, I did not want to leave the role of being a judge to becoming more of an administrator. And I told Garvin that, and I told him that I'm glad you called because I am interested in a district court, county district court, or county court judgeship. And he said to me in the nicest way, I'll call you back soon on that. And I said to him, will it be okay if I spoke to the Democratic county chairman and let him know we had this conversation? He said, by all means do that. And I did. And that was in, I think it was Wednesday before Thanksgiving Day of that year. Somewhere in the first 15 days of following January, he called me to tell me that he was working out a package and would I accept an appointment to the Union County District Court. I told him yes. And 2 weeks or thereabouts later, he called me again and he said, you know, you've already been a judge now for a few years. I don't think you ought to go to the district court. I think you need to go to the county court at least. I said, I agree with you. So he said, I'm going to move your name to be a county court judge. And he did. And he called me back again, said, well, I have it all set for you, but I can't push it through until some other people who need to be in the package, they get the okay from whomever they need to get the okay from whom they need to get the okay. And so he finally called me back, says, a package, it's a done deal. And I was sworn in somewhere around May 1st of 73, I think it was, 73. And he later, well, he became the Chief Justice shortly before I was sworn in as a county court judge, because Weintraub had been the Chief Justice, retired, and Cahill, Weintraub retired, who was the Chief Justice. Then Cahill appointed, first appointed Garvin as an associate counsel. Yeah, somebody retired, not Weintraub. Somebody retired, and the Governor Cahill appointed Pierre Garvin as associate justice. And when Chief Justice Weintraub retired, Cahill appointed Associate Justice Garvin to become the Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice Garvin died in less than 60 days after he became Chief Justice. Yeah. But that's the history of it. And so Governor Cahill was the one who made my initial appointment to the county court. And I remained in the county court until the constitutional amendment was passed in 1978 that merged the district and county courts into the Superior Court. And so you had only the Superior Court with 3 divisions: the Superior Court Appellate Division, the Superior Court Chancery Division, and the Superior Court Law Division. And Law Division had attached to it a small claim division, which is the old district court. Yes. And that's the way it remained today. At that time, there was also a court called the Juvenile and Domestic Relation Court. That remained so for another 3 years after that merger, and another constitutional amendment was passed to merge that court into the Superior Court. And, and the way the Constitution, 1947 Constitution read, it had created a Supreme Court, a Superior Court with a Law Division and Chancery Division, and such other courts as the legislature may from time to time create. And they call those, they use the term inferior courts. So that language was taken out to eliminate the word inferior and just said such other courts. And when those other courts merged, then we had just the Superior Court and the 3 division. Yes.
So,
and I sat in all of them.
So let's talk about the county court position, which you said you were sworn in May of '73. What at that time? What did that cover? What kind of cases were you hearing at that point?
Well, the county court was part of the political compromise that was made during the 47 constitutional convention that created the 1947 Constitution that became part of, that became effective in September 15th or September 1 of 1948. That was part of the political compromise that was made. And that meant that those judges would go through the first approval process by the county senators. The legislative redistricting had not yet occurred, and that impacted later. And the jurisdiction of the county court was limited to the county, but it was countywide jurisdiction for anything in the county. Civil cases, criminal cases, wills and estates, things like that. And I sat in both the civil and criminal division while I was in the county court. As a matter of fact, when a tragedy occurred in my family on August 1, 1975, I was a county court judge assigned to the criminal division. That's the day that my brother, who operated a tavern in Newark, was murdered as he closed his tavern. And I felt that I should be taken off of criminal calendar because I may have been running the risk of trying to look at some potential criminal and think whether or not that person may have had something to do with my brother's murder, because Elizabeth is so close to Newark line, yeah, and his tavern was not far from the Elizabeth line. So the assignment judge accommodated very easily, and I went to civil only. And incidentally, they never apprehended anybody for the murder of my brother. But that was the nature of the county court work, and I did at different times all of it: criminal work, civil work, wills and probate, and one part of it in the probate division that I really enjoyed, not that I didn't enjoy all the rest of it, was presiding over adoption. And in one of the adoption cases, I did two I mentioned very briefly. In one, I thought the law had been violated, so I referred it to the prosecutor, even recommended quietly to the prosecutor that I knew that you may not want to take any action on it. Somebody had gotten one or two children through an illegal source out of a foreign country and had paid money for it. That was in violation of New Jersey law. I approved the adoption because it being cruel and unusual punishment to require that a child be sent back to the poor country from which the child originated. And I sent the matter to the prosecutor, who decided to do nothing. And the second one was a case in which the federal Supreme Court had required that before terminating parental rights, even people who are in prison, you have to give notice to them and offer an opportunity to appear at the hearing. And so I did that in the case, and father was in prison for a long time for robbery, and the typical robbery sentence ran between 18 and 20 years back then, on the Title 2A rather than 2C that we have today. And so we brought him up, and he shocked everybody. When he testified, he made it clear that despite the fact that he had been away in prison for probably a few years, he still had carried on a good, loving relationship with his son that was up for adoption. And so when the mother who wanted to adopt the child heard about this wonderful, loving relationship, she started to cry and indicate that she's not sure that she wanted to take the child away from the father. And so the father kept interrupting her, raising his hand while she's on the stand. So I finally asked her to step down and brought him back to the stand. And he said to me, he had come to court today because he was going to object to the adoption, but he is now listen to this potential adoptive mother, and he likes what he's hearing, and he concedes that there's no way he can be as a good a parent to this child that he loves as this potential mother can be, given all that he's heard. So he said I should go ahead and approve the adoption, and that's what I did. First time it ever happened, but it was a wonderful outcome, and I'm sure she was a wonderful one. In another context, a Catholic couple who was married had gone to Catholic Charities for a child, and the child had been placed in the home, and it was a premier placement because of the high demand for the children from Catholic Charity. If you got placement of a completely healthy child, this child was completely healthy. After the child was placed in the home, the father said to the wife, I not only not want to proceed with the adoption anymore, but I want a divorce from you. And so we let the divorce proceed first. And the question was, would Catholic Charity still consent to the adoption of the single parent? And I really don't remember what the answer was, but I think, yeah, I don't remember their answer, but the ultimate decision was that the child had to be returned to Catholic Charity, because the social worker provided me with a sufficient basis to conclude that if not this single parent, there are at least 25 to 50 married couples that were glad to take this child into the home. Now, that decision was not made in any wise based on an attempt to discriminate against a single parent, because I did approve single parent adoption, and I approved interracial adoptions too. And I know some of the professionals had objection to approval of interracial adoption. I never did. I was looking at the quality of life the family and the child will have together, rather than the skin color of the family adopting the child. Now, was I naive to some extent? Maybe proven right, but I had no doubt that in all those cases, it was the best decision for the child, at least at that time. And I never heard of anybody that I approved for adoption ever trying to become unadopted.
Was same-sex couples adopting an issue then? Or?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
There was one case that came out of the appellate division that disapproved it, and I never had the opportunity to make a decision when I was presiding over adoption. But the whole game has changed since then. Yeah. The New Jersey court system would not tolerate allowing a judge to disapprove of an adoption based solely on the fact that this is the same-sex couple.
Now, during this time, this is when you had your courtroom downstairs?
Yes.
Can you describe that a little bit for us?
It was a powder blue courtroom, a little lighter than, I think this is blue. There's so many mixtures today. And it was a very nice sized courtroom. And I had all of the private amenities, a shower, full bath, and more importantly, the prisoners did not have to use the main elevator, because following lunchtime, the elevator that jurors would use to go up and down would be the same elevator that prisoners would be brought back from the jail. And it didn't have so much loss of time. And while down there, I presided over another kind of case, a fellow who had gone to Yale Law School, and he got in a lot of trouble because he was madly in love with a lady that he had married, and she started to cheat on him, and he found out with whom she was cheating, and became angry. And it was decided, not by me, that he had some problems he needed to have addressed. And so the case was assigned to me. He had filed all kinds of municipal complaints against judges and everything else. And I talked with him very nicely, and he agreed to do everything I asked him to do. And he, loved the way I treated him. So he liked opera, and he knew I liked opera too. So he would come out in the rotunda and start singing one of the operas. And And one of my sheriff officers would invariably come up to me and say, "What should we do?" I'd just go and tell him, "Calm down," and treat him like a human being. I knew he had issues, but was very smart, and he took pride in telling me that he had read to a classmate at Yale, an African American male who was blind. So I think he assumed that I treated him nicely because of that experience. That was not the sole reason. Part of it was I could tell that inside he was probably a very nice person and would respond differently when treated nicely. Yeah.
So at this point, in the mid-70s or so, were you, again, one of only a few African Americans serving on the bench in this area or even statewide, if you know?
I was only one in New Jersey statewide. Judge Roger Yancey was the first to be appointed, and I think he was appointed in 1956 or somewhere around that. And I think the second one was at this court, F. Fillmore Wood. His picture's hanging out there. Yancey was appointed to the Essex County District Court and was elevated eventually to the county court. Woods was appointed to the county court. Another fellow that I knew who used to be an assistant prosecutor in Essex became a county court and eventually a Superior Court judge. And a friend of mine was serving in the Atlantic County District Court. But I think part of his problem was he was afraid to try to move because a new position would mean that he would no longer have tenure. And he was afraid that the politician would play the game on him and kick him off the bench when that term expired, term of office expired. I never thought so. Half father was the boss down there. So statewide, when I became a judge, that county Superior Court judge, I think there may have been 5 or 6 statewide.